Haideți să-l aplaudăm, să-l încurajăm.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. I hope we are all suitably caffeine infused. So ready for the next session. I'm going to start off, I always like to start off with a quote. So you'll gather from my accent, I'm originally from England. I actually live in Colorado now, and I've done for 25 years. But even I can still quote people like Winston Churchill. And one of his quotes that always stands out for me is, difficulties mastered are opportunities won. So what I want to share with you this morning is not so much the story of ApaNova, but how other companies like ApaNova are transforming the planet as we speak. What are the key ingredients for that success? That's my role, and then Christie will follow on after me and deep dive into ApaNova made what I'm going to be talking about a reality over the last few years. And of course, several of the speakers already mentioned that yesterday the book was published here in Romania. As you can see there, that was a signing that we did in Florida 4 weeks ago, where it was released to the world. And of course, we were very pleased to say that it's the #1 bestseller on Amazon across 3 categories: business, process re-engineering, change management, and project management. So that of itself is an achievement. But what I want to acknowledge before I start is that when we talked, as the panel were doing this morning, about the Romanian, if you like, disposition to be self-effacing, not to be out there, and so on. With ApaNova, you have a global leading company that have set the standard by winning an award on the world stage in 2019. So it's something you should all be very rightly proud of. So I'm going to go through some of the ingredients for what helped to make that sort of thing a success. And one of the key things I want to start with is, how does business transformation get done? What is today's reality about it? Because so often I'll talk to CEO, and their first pitch is, when we're talking about successful business transformation, one of the first things those CEOs will say to me is, Steve, you must realize we're not an Amazon. And my response always is, why are you not an Amazon? And they go, obviously Amazon have got magic pixie dust sprinkled all over them to be able to change and do what they do. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a number of fundamentals, which I'll discuss towards the end of this, and they're common ingredients for success for all these organizations. What I'd just like to think about for a minute or two, you could probably gather I'm the oldest guy in the room here. I've been in sort of business for 40 odd years, started out as an industrial engineer. So I've always looked for science in the way things get done. And transformation has gone through a transformation in the last 20 years, whereas the things that you can see on that screen, if you like, an academic interpretation about where to focus if you wanted to get better 20 years ago. So some of those companies that are featured on that diagram there, yeah, they achieve success using these various ingredients. But if we think about what's happened in the world, not just here in Romania over the last sort of 30 years, but in the last couple of decades, everything seems to have changed. The customers change, the technology's changed, and in fact, the world has changed in so many considerable ways. And yet, to many of us, the way we're doing business is very similar to how it might have been 20 or 30 years ago. We're still approaching the world through a lens of the industrial age, through a lens that was given to us by a guy called Adam Smith back in 1776 in a book called The Wealth of Nations. And many organizations are still trying to follow that credo. And of course, they've fallen by the wayside. They no longer exist in today's leading advanced companies. So when we talk about the world of change, we can think of some notable figures that we all respect because we use their products and services every day. We go out, we buy. When we're making choices, if we're given a choice, we will go to some of these people. So if you're thinking about Mr. Dyson at the bottom left, you're looking at Steve Jobs, bless his soul. You're thinking of the richest man on the planet, Jeff Bezos. And some of you will not probably know the guy on the lower right. He's Tony Hsieh, which are the world's most successful retail organizations selling shoes and other. What is their perspective on business transformation? What allowed them to make such powerful, persuasive messages out there in the world? What gave them the right to be able to say, look, transformation has changed? And I think the shift for me goes back to some of the work I was doing 20 odd years ago with a company called Virgin Mobile in the States. And the guys were saying to us our particular methodology was becoming somewhat out of date. As I said, I was an industrial engineer, a Lean Six Sigma master black belt for my sins. And they were saying, Steve, your methodology, it's fine. It might have worked in the 20th century, but it's not going to work in the 21st century. So my response to that was, what's missing? And the simple thing that was missing, and you can scan the horizon of business methodologies, still very much the same, is there's no emphasis on the customer. It's all about what we do as a business rather than what we deliver. And what these guys discovered, amongst the many other companies that we'll talk about in a few minutes, was that if we focus on what we deliver and begin to align ourselves around that delivery, a lot of the stuff that we thought was traditionally required is no longer needed. Now, I term that observation as being moving outside in, moving away from that inside-out, industrial age, linear production management type thinking, to actually embracing this idea that we all exist to deliver outcomes. And if we can understand collectively what our global purpose is and our outcome is that we want to achieve, and then progressively align all our people, all our technology, everything that we're doing in the company to actually the achievement of that, we'll put ourselves in a much better place. And that is the distinction that ApaNova have achieved for themselves in terms of when, as judging panels, we were looking at all these companies from all over the world pitching themselves to actually win a Global Transformation Award Prize. ApaNova, that's the story that we're going to hear from Christie a little bit later. So when we're thinking about the world it's become outside in, let me try and simplify it. People are not defining themselves by what they do, but by what they deliver. So if I ask the question, what business are Walt Disney in today? Many of us would still respond, entertainment, right? Most of us would say entertainment. And of course, when we're contrasting ourselves to see how we get better, we go to other entertainment companies to see how they're doing that. How do they win customers? How do they keep customers on board? How do they get them coming back for more? And we go and contrast and compare our KPIs with those other entertainment companies. Well, Disney don't do that. They don't do that anymore. The business Disney say they're in, and we all know the answer to this if any of us have had that experience, they're in the business of magic, okay? And it says, oh yeah, that's all that very high-level vision-y stuff, isn't it? No, it's not. Every single person, every cast member who works for Walt Disney can articulate to you how they contribute to magic. So at every single level of the organization, they can articulate that, and that comes through on the KPIs. So what do you think Disney would go and benchmark themselves against? Not other entertainment companies. It'd be other people who are producing magic on the planet. And I'll let you think about that for a moment or two. Think of another one, Hallmark cards, as they used to be known, right? So you go, what business are they in? Oh, they're in the business of greetings cards. And you go, yeah, that's what they do. That's not what they deliver. If you and I think about it, why do we go and buy a greetings card? What do we do that for? We do that to express some sort of emotion, some sort of congratulations or sympathy, or the well done, the pat on the back, or it's a festive time of the year, it's Christmas time. That's why we would go and buy it. So Hallmark reinterpreted the businesses that they're in as being in the business of expression. Now, the natural question that lends itself there is, if I go down into the front line of what's happening at day-to-day level in Hallmark cards, how much of what everybody is doing is contributing to the achievement of expression? And of course the answer is, Steve, you don't understand the industry that we're in. We're in the business of greetings cards, so we got really good at doing greetings cards. It's just become a very complicated world all of a sudden, and that's why it takes us 14 months from the inception of a Christmas card to actually get it in the store. You've got 14 months. Now, we could apply some good old-fashioned improvement techniques to actually reducing that 14 months to, say, less than 12 months or 11 months. And 20 years ago, we'd have got a pat on the back for achieving some efficiency improvement. They've taken that process, which took 14 months, down to 4 days. Now, of course, naturally, we're all going to say, you cannot possibly do 14 months' worth of work in 4 days. You are correct, because we're not doing any more. What we're doing is we're looking at the work that we do from an outside-in perspective. How much of what we're doing today contributes to the outcome that we actually want to achieve? Finish off with a couple there. Emirates. Many of us will have had the opportunity to fly Emirates. And we'd say, yeah, they're a really good airline. They differentiate themselves from people like British Airways quite significantly. And we know what a pleasant experience that is. Now, interestingly enough, they articulate their business of not being in the business of aviation, but being in the business of beyond tomorrow. That's a very customer-centric way of looking at things. It's about getting you and I to where we want to be and having the experience beyond today, tomorrow. Now, is everything we're doing in our organization contributing to the delivery of that? So I hope you're seeing a trend here that's emerging, and this shift away from defining ourselves by what we do to redefining ourselves to what we deliver. And then last but not least on this diagram is Gilead Sciences. It's the US's most profitable pharmaceutical company. They've been so successful in their transformation that it's been featured in Business Week twice as a case study. And still, I will go to pharmaceutical companies and they'll say to me, yeah, but we're not a Gilead Sciences. You need to understand we're so completely different. But we're not. We're people who, if we're given the purpose and we're given the process and the method to actually navigate towards it, then we can actually get there. And I think that's an underlying sort of theme from this morning. Yeah, the technology is really important and digital is really important, but it's not about the tools, it's about the people, it's about our motivation, it's about our alignment towards success. And then we'll bring in the necessary tools to actually enable us to be able to achieve our outcomes. So there's not just one company here, there's many companies. Some of those are well-known names, some are less well-known. The distinction for why we're all sat in this room today is what ApaNova have achieved in a sector that's not known for innovation, let's be really frank about that, is not necessarily a sexy industry or business to be in. They've achieved a profound shift using the techniques that were fine-tuned within organizations like this. Meanwhile, other organizations that we might have all known in the past, the Nokias, the Motorola's, the list of names is almost endless these days, have fallen by the wayside. And what's that? Is that because they're not applying effort? Yes, they are applying effort. But what they're applying effort to do is try to improve what they were doing, without realizing the past was never designed for the future. And just as was observed this morning, we're now in the third decade of the 21st century. And if our organizations are still using techniques which were fine-tuned back in the 1700s, then something might not be quite right. So that's a big difference that all these guys have understood and achieved. And if there were two summary charts that I would give you to take away is, industrial age thinking and practice really started there on that left-hand side. Let's define the services and products we want to take to market. We then go out and then we discuss and we define a market. We look at customer segmentation and we break customers down. And if you become a global corporation, in fact, your market is the whole. And yet, customers ourselves, we become quite fickle, quite promiscuous. If we're given a choice, we'll exercise it. We've become quite rebellious if we have a poor experience. And it used to be said back in the start of my career, 30, 40 years ago, total quality management was the big thing then. And we used to have a poster, and it used to say, if you give a customer a bad experience, they'll tell 20 other people. What's that like these days? In 20 seconds, I can go on Twitter and tell my 2 million followers, I've just had a poor experience with United Airlines. I haven't, by the way. So if there's any United Airlines people in the room, it was quite good. It was okay coming across the Atlantic a couple of days ago. But you get the idea. The world has so significantly changed. So it's down to us to actually embrace that change. So the slide I like to use, which is a summary of outside-in working. And again, this isn't the privilege of some of those organizations. Jeff Bezos articulated this back 15 years ago, and he actually wrote a book about it called Working Backwards. Steve Jobs articulated it back in 1997 now, and we think how long ago that was. Don't start with the technology. You've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. Then you'll figure out what you'll be able to do right. So I think the summary we've got there is, if we understand truly our customers and what their needs are, not their wants, not all that voice of customer stuff, but actually go out and figure out what their needs are, even when the customers don't necessarily know it themselves, we can then redefine our products and services in that context. And the world is a simpler place that is aligned and controlled. So to a point that was made this morning in terms of corporate governance, in terms of regulation, And you can imagine working in the pharmaceutical space. I used to think financial services was complex until I went into pharmaceutical. And of course, if they make a mistake, they actually kill somebody very quickly, right? So they are very risk averse. And interestingly enough, moving in this way, as you'll see from Christie's demonstration, allows you to have much more significant control over what's happening and when it's happening in favor of what we're trying to achieve. So in terms of organizations who are practiced in doing this, codifying these changes is really, it's not as complex as it might seem. We've got to get more scientific about the customer experience. Because when we talk about customer, and not many mentions of the C word this morning with the panel, but that's the reason why we're all here. We're all delivering products and services to our clients, our citizens, our customers. So whether we're in government, whether we're state-owned, whether we're a monopoly, and we can argue the toss on that, whether we're actually in a very volatile, fast-moving industry, if we could understand what our customers are about, and not in a soft and fluffy, sentimental way, not in a mission-y, vision-y thing, but actually what are the real measurable needs that we're trying to achieve on their behalf, and then align our key performance indicators to delivering against those needs, we'll get to be in a much better place than the one that we were perhaps previously. As I've already mentioned, Steve Jobs said the customer experience is the process. And I wasn't actually at that 97 event, but a few years later I had the very good fortune of interviewing a guy called Jeff Bezos, who we've already mentioned. He wasn't the richest guy on the planet then, and I was asking him the question, when did you get this stuff? When did this become a fundamental way that Amazon began to do business? And he shared with me a story of when he was in the shower first thing in the morning, and nothing wrong about that. He was having a shower, as we all do, first thing in the morning, and he was contemplating his day. And on this particular day, in the early 2000s, he was going to have to go to another shareholder meeting and present to them why Amazon wasn't being as profitable as it should be. And he said, I'm thinking to myself, we are customer-centric. We are very oriented against the customers, and all my guys talk about that. And then he said, it suddenly hit me. He said, how would I know that? How would I definitely know that if it wasn't just through the revenue and the profitability and our cost-income ratios and so on? And he said, it suddenly hit me. So he said, I went in that morning, and he said, I sat down with the engineers, and from his thinking, he created something called the Bezos Mandate. So you can still, if you go and Google that, you'll still see that up there on the web. And in that mandate, it was an edict about how we were going to develop software. Because he said, when I asked the engineers, guys, tell us about the company, he said everybody was talking customer centricity. Everybody was saying the right things about customer experience. He said, but when I asked them to produce the top 10 key performance indicators, they were all about measuring what we were doing. They weren't about measuring what we were delivering. He said there were very few. In fact, he said it was less than 20% were measures of the outcomes we were trying to achieve. It was all about our projects coming in on time, to budget, and achieving deliverables. And not unremarkably, if your deliverables are not aligned against customer success, you may get really good at doing dumb stuff. And that was his observation back then. He articulated that in his book, Working Backwards. So the customer experience is the process, is a fundamental piece of this jigsaw, is that every single process we've got in our organizations should in some way contribute to customer success. That's what I refer to as connecting the dots from the leadership team and the strategic imperative right the way to every single task and activity that we're doing within the organization. And the final thing about this one as well is that, and it goes back to the old technology digital discussion, not unnaturally, people who are involved in technology want to sell it to you, right? This is the snake oil that will solve all your problems, right? But that's starting in the wrong place. It can teach us that. So if we actually provide the right techniques and tools to our people and get out of the way, they can define success and organize themselves around that. There's some very innovative organizational models emerging from this world at the moment. Self-organizing teams, some of us will be aware of that. All right? But it's about understanding the outcome we want to achieve and then building the team around that outcome to actually achieve it. And not surprising, all those functional specialist silos that we traditionally had are no longer necessary. We can organize ourselves in a different way. And I'll share one observation that came from one organization who was going through this 2 or 3 years ago. And we asked them to put the organization chart on the wall. And of course they did. And just as the ApaNova guys have observed, all these different layers and all these different things. And one of the testaments to actually being on this journey is that you see this delayering of the organization chart. You don't need all these different layers. You don't need all these different functions. And when we put the chart on the wall, and some of you might have seen this, there's a famous Dutch artist who painted a picture of a chair. And underneath the painting it says, "What is this?" And most of us would observe, "Oh, duh, it's a chair." Right, and there's, no, it's not. It's a picture of a chair. Our organization charts are collective hallucinations that don't physically exist. It's a bit like being in the Matrix. Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Right? Now, you can stay living in that world of hierarchy and structure that was given to us by Adam Smith back in 1776. Or we can say, is that structure relevant for the third decade of the 21st century? Our contention would be is less so than ever. Right? So we can create new ways of thinking and new ways of working. So last couple of slides here, we need to rethink business transformation as well, because a lot of it is all soft and fluffy sentiments. It's the rabbit on the left, and don't we all love soft and fluffy rabbits? But it's not actionable. It's not real. We can't turn that strategic imperative into an operational plan. We have to start thinking more logically about how do we connect ourselves to the outcomes we want to achieve? And that requires innovation. That requires different levels of thinking from the ones that we're used to having. So different skill sets, different competencies, different means of actually being able to navigate towards the future. So in summary, this isn't about getting everybody to believe in business transformation from an outside-in perspective, but the results are directly measurable. They go to what I refer to sometimes as winning the Triple Crown. So I've been at conferences and keynotes and talked to people, and the CEOs will come up to me afterwards and say, "Steve, we're doing all that." And at that point I'll say, "Okay, show me your balance sheet and profit and loss statement." "Why do you want to see that? What's that to do with business transformation?" I go, "Triple Crown is being able to simultaneously reduce cost, grow revenue, and enhance service at the same time," as I said, simultaneously. And so often people will do business transformation, they'll be great on the cost side, great on the revenue side, great on improving service, but each one of those has a detrimental effect on the other. So if you remember that phraseology, it all boils down to how do we measure the success of every single project we're doing is how have we moved the dial on the Triple Crown. It's not rocket science, unless you're NASA, of course, when it might be. Okay. So in terms of, if I distilled all this down and why I believe that ApaNova, not I believe, the community, the operational excellence community who voted ApaNova as the #1 in the world for the global transformation project, and again, the ones that we've articulated the story in there, and thanks to all the authors and their contributions to that, is it comes down to the people. Having the people and the wherewithal to actually give the people the necessary tools and techniques and thinking which can allow them to reframe their organization. Having a process and a method which can allow you, tried and tested and proven, to navigate from where you might be to where you want to get to. Not some sort of happen chance or mystic sitting in sweat huts and things like that. It's actually scientific, and we can navigate to that place. And I think the fundamental thing that underpins all that and goes around it always is the purpose of our organizations, the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. Not just at the organizational level, but at the individual level. Is that purpose understood? And can we all align behind that purpose? And then we can all achieve the very similar and great things as ApaNova have been doing over these last few years. So, thank you very much. That's my piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For your experience in the United States, what is the most competitive company?
Most
competitive company.
Oh, competitive, again, we had a discussion about competition in the panel earlier on, and I'm always wary of competition because if we measure ourselves by our competitors, who are they? So it goes to that point I was saying earlier on is don't measure yourself by what you do, measure yourself by what you deliver. What is the outcome you're trying to... For instance, I mentioned Walt Disney going visiting Zappos. Now, are they competitors? No, they're not. They're collaborators, right? Does Zappos go and... Do they spend any time, they spend a little bit of time, comparing themselves with other people who sell shoes online. What would be the point of that? You could only get to be the best in your industry, but you could make a quantum leap if you actually understand that competition itself has changed. So that doesn't mean that those indicators about where are we in the market, and of course that doesn't mean that Amazon aren't paying attention to where they're appearing in the league tables. What it means is that we're spending less time analysing what our immediate competitor in our industry is doing. Now, I can answer your question in a different way. Who are the most progressive companies that we see doing lots of change? And it's not just in the States, it's on a sort of a global platform. Clearly, a lot of the stuff that informs this thinking came out originally of the retail space, and particularly the digital retail space, where new tools and techniques were enabling organizations to do things in a remarkably different way. So we can all list those people, and we can all list the people that we go and spend our money with if we're given the choice. They're up there for a reason, is because they consistently are trying to deliver better outcomes for you and I. Now, I know I haven't answered that question about who is the most competitive company, but I think it's a sort of a curveball type question.
For a company, where is the time to look inside their process to, let's say, to survive? Because we have the example of Nokia. Nokia, I think in 2008, had 40% of the total market share.
Yeah.
40%. Not
the most profitable telco on the planet at that time.
And now Nokia is nowhere. It's disappeared. Where is the time to look inside?
We would argue there's now, as you business case studies which talk about Nokia's demise and what actually happened. And everybody was trying very hard at the time the iPhone was introduced within Nokia to say, you know, what do we need to do? And we have some data which shows that they spent more money on voice of customer surveys in that period of time, 2007, 2008, than anybody else. And what essentially they were doing was going out and asking customers, what do you want? Now, I alluded to that a little bit earlier in the presentation by saying, don't go and ask customers what they want. What you need to do is figure out what they need. Apple's genius was to actually figure out something that we all need. Every single one of us has now got a smartphone. So it doesn't have to be an Apple one, it could be a Samsung or a Huawei or whatever. They redefined what we needed, whereas what Nokia were doing was spending time asking us questions about what we wanted. And if you can remember back to then, they came up with a real Frankenstein phone, the Nokia N97. Any of us remember that one? Because customers said, we like a bigger screen, but we like the keyboard thing, we like the clamshell design, and we want one of those pointy sticks as well. And they created the product that did that. Of course, it disintegrated within 6 months. It just wasn't feasible. So that sort of thinking about when does a company need to be doing this, it happens all the time. It shouldn't be a let's get into crisis and then we're going to reframe ourselves. It's an opportunity for those really successful companies to be even more successful, but it's also an opportunity for companies who have previously been surrounded in red tape and bureaucracy to completely rethink what is it we're trying to achieve? Who are we? What is our identity? And there's some good examples of companies with the same people transforming to outside-in thinking, and you go, you've got the same people. Yeah, but we grew new skill sets. We grew a different mindset, a different way of thinking.
Ok, thank you very much. Haideți să-l aplaudăm. A fost Steve Towers.